My mum taught me a magic word to make the monsters go away, and it works too well. By JessumGui. I don't tell this story. I don't tell it at counselling or in group. I don't tell it at the VFW on Tuesday nights when draft beer is 50 cents a mug and I've had a lot to drink. I don't tell it ever, but I think about it all the time. I'm telling it now for a reason. We'll get to that later. My father split when I was young, maybe around 3 or 4. I have only vague memories of him, none of which are good. His name is on my birth certificate, so I suppose I could have tracked him down if I had wanted to, but I never wanted to. What I do remember is that my mum was very afraid of him. She tried to hide it, but I knew. We didn't have much, me and Mum. She didn't get child support or alimony. I don't know if my father was a deadbeat or if Mum just wanted him out of our lives so badly that she didn't bother to ask for it. Either way, we spent the next few years living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a rundown tenement, while Mum worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, clothes on my back, and a roof over my head. I got the bedroom, she slept on the couch. The apartment below us was a crack house, so it's safe to say we weren't in a good part of town. I remember having to step over passed out addicts on the stairs when Mum walked me down to catch the school bus in the mornings. That's when I started having night terrors. Seeing my mum alternate between fear and exhaustion, listening to the noises coming up from the apartment below all night, and having to negotiate the stairway of the living dead just to get to school, I guess that's no surprise. One night, when I woke up screaming, Mum sat on the edge of my bed, holding my hand and brushing my hair with her fingertips. She taught me a magic word, wakibu. If I said it 3 times, it would make all the monsters go away, but I could only use it when I really needed to. Otherwise, the magic would wear off. It worked. I never used the magic word, but just knowing I had it made me feel safe. Eventually, I was able to sleep through the night. Things got better. Not much, but still better. Mum found a decent job where she didn't have to work so much, and we moved to a trailer park down by the interstate. It wasn't great, but at least there weren't any crack houses or junkies to step over. There were even some kids my age for me to play with. Midway through my senior year of high school, Mum was murdered. I came home from school to find a bunch of state police cruisers parked around our trailer. Everything was cordoned off with crime scene tape. My father had tracked her down, kicked in the front door, and stabbed her 37 times. They found him a couple of miles down the road. His car was in the ditch and he was passed out behind the wheel, covered in her blood. Apparently, he'd been looking for drug money. He murdered my mum for $18.52. She had been working night shifts and was asleep when I left that morning, so I never got to say goodbye. The evidence against him was overwhelming. They had DNA, fingerprints, and witnesses. My father copped a plea to avoid the death penalty and got life without parole. He now resides in D Block at the State Correctional Institution. The DA called me and told me the news. I didn't even get to confront the bastard in court. I buried my mum and hung around long enough to graduate school, then packed a couple of changes of clothes and a few photographs in a knapsack, sold the trailer and my mum's beat-up Impala, and donated everything else to Goodwill. My grandparents on my mum's side had died before I was born. I didn't know anything about my father's parents, and I didn't want to know. So, with no other options, I said goodbye to the few people in the trailer park that had meant something to me and joined the army. It was a couple of years later when it happened. I was a young sergeant leading my first fire team, deployed to the Kandahar province of Afghanistan. We were on patrol near the border, an understrength platoon in 4 up-armoured Humvees trying to interdict Taliban fighters crossing over from Pakistan. We made contact about 20 clicks southeast of a village named Shorawak. The lead Hummer was taken out by an IED, killing everyone on board. Then they hit us with heavy machine guns and RPGs from the low bluffs that paralleled the road. It was a classic L-shaped ambush. My vehicle took a rocket in the driver's door. It tore through the up armour like it was tissue paper and blew my driver to pieces. The kid was an FNG. I don't even remember his name, but I do remember being covered in his blood and internal organs. I rolled out from the front passenger's seat and hit the dirt, but when I tried to stand up to return fire, my leg buckled beneath me. My whole left side had been peppered with shrapnel. I dragged myself under the vehicle far enough to get a line of sight on the enemy, but it's hard to hit anything shooting a rifle one-handed. Above me, PFC Veracruz got off a few bursts with the 50 cal mounted in the turret, but the gun quickly fell silent. All the guns soon fell silent. First ours, then theirs. I had burned through the magazine in my rifle, making a lot of noise with little effect, but in the tight space beneath the Hummer and with my left arm shredded, I couldn't reload. The Taliban had come down from their firing positions, getting close enough that I could see their sandaled feet kicking up little puffs of dust as they approached to admire their handiwork and scrounge for loot. With my good hand, I fumbled out the pistol strapped to my thigh. I was going to make my death count. Mum didn't spend all those years working, scrimping and struggling to raise me just so I could give up without a fight. I'm not sure why it came to me at that moment. It's not something I had even thought about in years, but the memory of my mum sitting on the edge of my bed teaching me that magic word to make the monsters go away popped into my head. "Wakiboo, wakiboo, wakiboo," I whispered, trying to align my pistol sights on the shin of an approaching Taliban fighter with a shaking hand. The air seemed to crackle with static. There was a sizzle and pop, more felt than heard. My ears filled with pressure like they do on an aeroplane when it reaches altitude. The Taliban must have felt it too. I could see their feet shuffling in the dirt as they spun frantically, looking for a threat they could feel but not see, jabbering to each other in worried tones. Their voices were muffled by the pressure in my ears, and I didn't speak Pashto, but it wasn't hard to tell they were scared. A few seconds later, I heard the first scream. No, shriek is more like it, full of pain and terror. There was sporadic gunfire and more screams and shrieks, lots more. Some of it seemed to come from 100 or so meters away, some of it was very close. At one point, drops of blood pattered down onto the sand beside the Humvee like rain. A torso, its arms ripped off, thumped into the dirt. Intestines trailed from beneath the ribcage, where its lower half had been torn away. The Taliban fighter was still alive, his head lolled to the side and wide, terrified eyes locked on my own. He moved his mouth, but no sound came out, only a spill of bright red blood that soaked his beard and pooled in the sand beneath his cheek. His eyes lost focus, and the light went out of them. Everything went quiet, except for footsteps crunching on the gravel of the road, coming towards me. I raised my pistol with a trembling hand. Then I saw the feet, standing right beside the Hummer I hid beneath. They were large and gaunt, but not made of flesh. I don't know how to describe them other than to say they consisted of liquid smoke, both vaporous and viscous at the same time, and blacker than the deepest cave under the tallest mountain. Long fingers, gnarled and crooked, curled under the edge of the rocker panel. It bent down and peered at me. I saw its face. "Two more," it said, and a spike of white-hot pain lanced through the center of my skull. The next thing I remember was waking up in the psych ward at the army hospital in Frankfurt, Germany, missing my left arm at the shoulder. The doctor told me I had suffered a traumatic brain injury and had been in a catatonic state for almost a month. My arm had been too badly mangled and had to be amputated, but they managed to save my leg. She said I would only have about 50% use of it and would have to wear a brace, but it could have been worse. A few days later, an army captain came to visit. He was investigating what they were calling the Shorawak ambush. Since Shorawak was the closest place with a name to the attack site, that's what they called the incident. According to him, somebody had managed to radio for help and headquarters had dispatched the quick reaction force with a pair of Apache gunships for escort. When the QRF arrived, they found 3 survivors, me, PFC Veracruz, and a specialist first class named Gungan. The captain told me that all the friendly casualties had suffered from gunshot or shrapnel wounds, but all the enemy KIAs had been ripped apart. They estimated that 30 to 40 Taliban fighters had been killed, but there was no way to get an accurate count. Their dismembered bodies were scattered all over, and the desert had been practically painted with blood. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. He told me both Veracruz and Gungan had died on the helicopter flight to the aid station, so I was the only one left who could shed any light on what happened. I told him I didn't remember anything after the RPG hit my vehicle. In the end, the army couldn't figure it out, so they gave me a medal and closed the file. I spent the next few years in and out of hospitals, psych wards, group homes, shelters, and county jails. It wasn't all bad. There were times when I could keep it together long enough to hold down a steady job and afford my own place to live. I even had a girlfriend for a while. But it never lasted. Sooner or later, everything would fall apart and I'd be back out on the street. I wound up squatting in an abandoned building on the east side, ironically, not too far from that apartment my mum and I shared. That's when I said the words a second time. There were a bunch of us in that building. It was a pretty big space with room to spread out, so things stayed friendly for the most part. If somebody got on your nerves, you could move to another room on another floor. That didn't happen much though. Everyone got along pretty well. Tiffy was my favourite. She was everybody's favourite. Her real name was Tiffany, but we all called her Tiffy. She was a good kid, probably in her late teens or early 20s, always looking out for other people, sharing what she had no matter how little it was. I remember one time when some bakery had given her a bag of day-old donuts. Tiffy brought them back and divvied them up amongst the rest of us, even though that only left half a glazed donut for her. She was the one who stood up to the 3 punks that came in to roust us. That happened every once in a while. Petty thugs would come along, rough us up and rob us of what little we had, all for the pure joy of being cruel. Mostly, we hunkered down, rolled with the punches, and let them do what they wanted. Once they got bored and went away, we could collect the broken pieces of our miserable lives and get back to the dirty task of existing. That night, though, Tiffy wasn't having it. She got up in their faces, shouting and cussing. She even pushed one of them. They didn't like that at all. One of them punched her, knocked her out cold. When they dragged her off to the alley out back, everybody else scattered. I don't blame them. What else could they do? I don't know why I went after them. I'm a one-armed gimp. It's not like I could have taken on one of them, let alone 3. But maybe there was still some soldier left in me after all. They worked me over pretty good, and while I swam in and out of consciousness, they made me watch while they did things to Tiffy. They made sure I was awake and watching when one of them strangled the life out of her. I said the words, "Walkie-boo, walkie-boo, walkie-boo." They laughed at me, probably thinking I was babbling incoherently, but that laughter stopped abruptly when the air crackled with static. Then came the sizzle and pop. Overpressure plugged my ears. The creature came slouching from behind an overflowing dumpster, backlit by the weak illumination of a distant streetlight. Even hunched over, it was at least 8 feet tall and cadaverously thin, its flesh made of that liquid smoke. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see, but I heard everything. The shrieks, the cries, the wet tearing of flesh, the crack of breaking bones, the elastic snap of tendons stretched beyond their breaking points. When it was all over, I heard its footsteps approaching. I could feel the thing hovering over me, its presence like a suffocating weight pressing down. It grabbed me by the jaw with its fingers that felt like cold clay, lifting me, pinning me against the rough bricks of the building's wall, and held me until I opened my eyes. I saw its awful face, and, again, it spoke. "One more," it said, and that same white-hot spike of pain I had felt in the desert all those years ago lanced through my skull. I woke up a couple of weeks later in another psych ward. This time, I still had all my limbs, at least the ones I came in with. An orderly brought me up to speed. Someone had found me in a catatonic state, lying on the sidewalk in front of the building, and called 911. I had suffered another TBI. One of the cops that had showed up with the EMTs got curious and decided to have a look around. She found Tiffy and what was left of the 3 punks out back, and now that I was awake, there was a detective that very much wanted to talk to me. The detective's name was Mackenzie. He came across as a decent sort and seemed sincerely interested in solving Tiffy's murder. I appreciated that. I told him I'd been sitting on the front stoop to get some air when a couple of guys came along and beat me up. No, I didn't know how many. No, I didn't get a good look at any of them. As far as the girl went, I'd seen her around the building, but didn't know her and had no idea what happened. I don't think he completely bought my story, but without something solid, he had to let me go. That's been a while ago now. I'm not sure how long. Time can get a little fuzzy for me these days, with the 2 TBIs and all. Every couple of months, Detective Mackenzie drops by the halfway house where I've been staying with a couple coffees, the good stuff from the donut shop, not that gas station swill. We sit and talk and sip from our cups. Just before he leaves, he always asks if I might have remembered something that could help him solve Tiffy's murder. I always tell him no. What else am I going to say? That I can summon a demon to exact vengeance on my enemies using a word my mum made up when I was a little kid to keep me from being afraid? I don't even know if that's what it really is, a demon, I mean. For all I know, I'm somehow manifesting psychic energy into a physical form. But what if it really is a demon? What if the word really is magic? What if I can actually summon an evil entity from hell? What if worms had machine guns? Would the early birds still get them? As my old drill sergeant used to say. Doesn't matter what it is or where it came from. It told me, one more. I figure the next time I summon it will be the last. Maybe my brain gets this final scramble and I spend the rest of my life in the vegetable drawer at the VA hospital. Or maybe I just die. Either way, I don't really care. This world has worn me down to a nub. I'm so very, very tired, but I want to make this count. That's why I'm telling the story now. I want people to know that I made it count. Mum didn't spend all those years working, scrimping, and struggling to raise me just so I could give up without a fight. Detective Mackenzie is due to drop by for one of his visits. This time, when we talk, I'm going to confess to murdering Tiffy and those punks. I'll tell him I was sweet on her, and when I caught her in the alley getting overly friendly with those boys, I flew into a jealous rage and hacked them to pieces with an axe before I strangled Tiffy. If I couldn't have her, no one else could have her either, I'll say. And no, I don't remember what I did with the murder weapon. It'll be hard to believe that a one-armed bum with a gimpy leg was able to chop up 3 street thugs, but I know enough details of the murders to be convincing. Besides, I'm pretty sure he suspects me of something. Why else would he keep coming by to talk? It's certainly not for my sparkling personality. He'll believe me because he'll want to believe me. I'll cop a plea to avoid the death penalty. That'll land me on D block at the State Correctional Institution, where my father is. If it wasn't for him, my mum and I would have never had to live in a 1-bedroom dump over a crack house. I would never have had night terrors. She would have never taught me that word. If he hadn't murdered her, I would have never joined the army, gone to Afghanistan, been mangled in an ambush, and wound up a crippled, half-crazy bum who was forced to watch one of the kindest, gentlest souls I've ever known get choked to death. He ruins my life. He ruins my mum's life. I don't know how many other lives he's ruined, but the time is coming to settle his account. After all these years, we're finally going to meet again, he and I, face to face. And when we do, I'm going to say those words. Walkie boo, walkie boo, walkie boo. I just want to thank JessumGui for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, please head over to their Reddit page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.